Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We are here as TRPI, or Totally Renewable Phillip Island, and Housing Matters, Bass Coast, to talk about some of the local context around the development of the Bass Coast Shire social and affordable housing strategy, plus the big housing build. So I'll very briefly introduce myself. I'm Zoe Geyer, the coordinator of Totally Renewable Phillip Island, and today we also have Jessica Harrison from Housing Matters. So without further ado, I will share my screen. Basically, I'll be presenting a little bit of information, and then Jessica will present a little bit as well from Housing Matters perspective, and then we'll open it up to some general discussion and questions as well. So obviously this event is forming part of the 2021 Sustainability Festival, Reimagined, which the theme is Future Homes and Farms for 2040, empowering people to adapt. So it's an incredibly fitting theme for what we're talking about today. Okay, so before we begin, I would of course like to pay our respects to the First Nations people of Australia and acknowledge the Bunurong, as well as our neighbours, the Gunai-Kurnai, as the true owners and custodians of the land, seas and life. I'd just like to acknowledge that these lands were never ceded and seek truth-telling and healing as a pathway to reconciliation. Now, as I'm speaking on behalf of TRPI, I should probably explain what TRPI is. So Totally Renewable Phillip Island is basically a movement or a forum. So we're a collection of groups and individuals who are passionate about changing for a positive future. So we believe we are all in it together, and there's power in all our voices coming together as well. And our main mission actually through TRPI is to be carbon neutral by 2030, but really that takes in a whole societal vision of how we get there. So, and again, I'll keep this very brief, but this diagram shows on the top section all of our member groups. So we currently have 15 member groups, and then all of our working groups. So we also have 6 working groups, so education, energy, transport, food and waste, carbon farming and carbon accounting. And we're very keen to share any learnings that we have and take them to other communities in Bass Coast, particularly some of the waterline communities. And as part of that, we're actually, for this festival, going to be having some coffee chats in Coronet Bay, Coronella and Cowes. First of all, let's have a talk about the local context for the draft social and affordable housing strategy and the big housing build for Bass Coast. So you may say, what are these things? And fair enough. So what I've done here is I've just put a little snapshot on, which shows where these are available on the council website, Bass Coast Shire Council website. So basically I'm referring to both of these things, the Bass Coast Social and Affordable Housing Strategy and the Big Housing Build, which is through Homes Victoria. And you can actually download the PDFs that I'm sort of giving a bit of an overview on today. So as mentioned, the Bass Coast Shire Council has been working on a social and affordable housing strategy with stakeholders. So far they've uploaded on the website their background report for the social and affordable housing strategy. And it's going to be released to community very soon, the draft strategy. But I think we need to look at a little bit of the context of this and what it's all about and why we actually need a strategy. So this is from 2020 on the website. I'm literally just putting some snippets on here. So the Mayor of the Bass Coast, an online forum held by the Salvation Army, the increasing numbers of people who are sleeping rough or facing homelessness, and basically the work that council is doing around health and wellbeing and social and affordable housing is critical. So here we see also, I think this was in that same announcement, the state government should be acknowledged for their strong commitment in their $5.3 billion big housing build program. And 25 million has been committed for affordable housing in Bass Coast. There's a little bit more to that story, but we'll no doubt touch on that later as well. So this is in a way tied in, but separate to what I've underlined in red here. Council is developing its social and affordable housing strategy at the moment. So this is kind of where we're sitting. So this is an article from the Sentinel Times, October, the 1st of October this year, so very recent. And it was basically a call for people to submit land or development proposals for social housing. However, there was quite a short time frame, so no doubt we'll hear a little bit more about that. And this is an excerpt from the Hornsby & Co, who are the consultants who prepared the Sustainable and Affordable Housing Background Report. Basically saying again that they're interlinked, the two reports or two issues, but there is a relationship between them. Then you can say, do we actually have any issues with sustainable and affordable housing? Well, this is from the same report. There is a clear and immediate need for more affordable housing in the Bass Coast. And what horrified me is the report estimated that there are 733 households in Bass Coast in need of affordable housing, which represents 5.1% of all households in the Shire. And that's purely an estimate. And I think some of the figures I've used are actually from 2018 to 2019. So let's talk about terminology. So is social and affordable housing the same as housing affordability? So no, affordable housing is defined as public housing, community housing, and other housing types, which include social housing, which is suitable for very low and moderate income households. And what we probably know sort of more as market housing, the issues with housing affordability, are more the relationship between basically what we make as income and what we can afford to pay to either pay mortgages or rent or secure housing. So today we are obviously focusing on social and affordable housing. So according to the Planning Environment Act, this is defined as public housing owned and managed by the state government, community housing, which is owned and or managed by an agency, usually not for profit, and a broad range of other possible housing types, again, for low and moderate income households. So one thing to note as well, social housing makes up the largest component of the affordable housing sector, and rents in social housing are set as a proportion of household income. So usually between 25 to 30% of income. And again, this is out of the background report that was prepared for council. So again, if we have a look at this notion of affordable housing versus housing affordability, in blue, we basically see our capitalised affordable housing types, so emergency shelter and crisis accommodation, transitional and supported housing, social housing, public and community housing, and then there's also affordable rental housing and affordable home ownership. And what is shown in green is market housing. So this is basically housing that is in the private market, either rental or home ownership. So we are today talking about what is in blue. And again, this is an interesting point drawn from this table. So referring to these first three categories, emergency shelter and crisis accommodation, transitional and social housing, fewer than 4.5% of all dwellings in Australia fall within this category, and they're trying to cater for up to 40% of all households. So I think this shows a pretty clear picture that, yes, there is a need for social and affordable housing. Now, out of this same report in March 2021, there were a total of 693 applications on the Victorian Housing Register priority list. So 424 were for one-bedroom dwellings, which is interesting to know. So out of that breakdown, we have 159 in Cowes, 172 in Inverloch, and 363 in Wonthaggi. Now, it's interesting to think of what some of the impacts of this shortage could be. But here we see it's an urgent issue in an environment of rising rents and lack of short-term accommodation options. So, as it mentioned here, motels and caravan parks have been used for short-term emergency accommodation. However, many are now focusing on tourism and are more reluctant to take on emergency accommodation clients. We also see the lack of crisis accommodation contributed or attributed 769 people being turned away from services, and this is back in 2018 to 2019. Another issue that is very prevalent and of concern is family violence, and we see that this makes a substantial contribution to the risk and prevalence of homelessness for women and their children. So in Bass Coast, 2019 to 2020, there were 739 incidents of family violence. And I should say that was most likely reported incidents. So in the period ending December 2020, there was a 32% increase in incidents on the previous year. So again, if you think about some of these figures that I've been mentioning, a lot of these are taken from 2018, 2019, and we're seeing potentially massive increase with some of the impacts of coronavirus as well. So we also see that motel and hotel accommodation is the only option available for victim survivors of family violence and their children. So it's costly, often not safe enough, has limited privacy, no cooking facilities, and rooms not big enough to accommodate the family. So I think we've determined we do need social and affordable housing of all spectrums. So again, this is taken from the background report for the Council's Sustainable and Affordable Housing Policy. And this is basically recommending where these social and affordable housing should be located. And it does actually say to avoid issues of social isolation, transport poverty, and to have access to services that many people need. So the housing needs to be located in townships with services such as health, education and shops, close to the town centre to be within walking distance to services, and accessible to public transport. And again, I won't go through this in great detail because I know there's a lot of words on the page, but basically the report also talks about how council land could be used for affordable housing, whether to own or facilitate affordable housing. So there are a few options: leasing to a community housing organisation, selling the site to a community housing organisation, gifting, we like this, gifting the site to a community housing organisation, or retaining and developing the site. And then it does say with a community housing organisation to manage the property and tenancies. And partnering to deliver affordable housing, obviously given what we were just talking about a moment ago, the idea that partnering with community housing organisations and that they actually carry a lot of the skills required, but that also council could partner with private developers and community housing organisations. It does specifically call out that when working with community housing organisations, it needs to be noted that often they are not-for-profit organisations with limited resources. So a request from council for a community housing organisation to be involved in a partnership arrangement should come with meaningful opportunities, such as access to land, an advocacy program, streamlined planning processes, or support for their funding bids to state government. So I'm trying to keep it as brief as possible. As I mentioned earlier, these reports are available on the website. So I'm really just trying to capture some of the content in a more easily digestible way, I guess. And this is basically the recommendations or the key issues drawn out in that background report for council with their sustainable and affordable housing, of how they really need to make sure the new strategy interacts and what it can achieve. So these are the key themes. So more emergency accommodation and social housing, strategies and actions to implement the recommendations, to inform and reflect the needs that are generated through this report in other council strategies, policies and action plans, set a position from council on use of council land for affordable housing, highlight the need for additional funding, and highlight opportunities for advocacy, engagement, and partnering. Okay, so we've talked a fair bit.
You're doing a great job. I'm loving it.
Thanks, Christine. I'm pleased.
I'm tagging a question for later.
Excellent. That's great. Yep. Hold on to that one.
I'm loving it. Thank you.
Yeah, great.
I'd touch base.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I get sick of my own voice after a while.
You're doing good.
So basically, we've had a bit of a chat about the sociable and affording housing strategy. So that's currently in draft form. The background report is up on the website. So that's what I've been referring to mostly today. This is the fact sheet, also up on Council's website. So again, we've talked about this first item here, the 5-year social and affordable housing strategy. And then this question, what is the big housing build? So that is this second point here. So the Victorian government through Homes Vic, I believe, or maybe they're called Victorian government now. Well, I don't know, they've changed their name, I think. They've committed a minimum of $25 million investment in social and affordable housing in Bass Coast as part of its big housing build. Now, it's interesting to note that 25 million is actually the minimum investment. So no doubt, I think Jessica and I may even touch on this later, that there is potential to try to get additional funding if we can demonstrate a need in the region. And these are some of the questions on the website. So does council receive the 25 million or any funding from the big housing build? And the answer is no. The funding's directly from the state government to social and affordable housing development projects. The council's role is to encourage and facilitate other organisations to deliver. So does council get to decide where they'll be built? Again, no. They don't have the final say. However, they can help identify suitable locations. And who is responsible for delivering the new housing? So the state government is primarily seeking development proposals from community housing providers, but will also consider partnership proposals from private and community housing providers, local government and institutional investors. So there's a few models available there. So again, this information, pretty much everything, apart from some of the media clips, have been drawn from this information on the Bass Coast Council website under social and affordable housing. So I recommend, for the full disclosure, to go and have a read. You've probably heard most of the dot points already, but it's worth reading the full context to be fully informed. So before I hand over to Jessica, I thought I'd just wrap up with a few of the overview points. So basically, we really need to get this happening in Bass Coast is one of the messages I take out of it. And 5.1 of households in the Shire are in need of affordable housing. That's massive. So we need to fix that. And then also the idea of, instead of us going it all alone and looking primarily at the private housing affordability issues in the market, perhaps we need to come together and think of the huge benefits of being community and looking out for each other, and how we could engage in perhaps some more innovative models of social and affordable housing. But I think the takeaway message is, let's come together and help community housing providers to partner and develop proposals for social and affordable housing in Bass Coast. And again, just a reminder, there's a lot to take in, but we like having chats face to face as well. So again, TRPI will be in Coronet Bay, Coronella and Cowes, and we're very collaborative. So if anyone, any other groups or organisations want to come along, that is more than welcome as well. So without further ado, that wraps up my sort of initial local context angle in terms of the social and affordable housing strategy and the big housing build. So I think we might move on to Jessica now, and then we'll have some questions at the end. So Jessica, do you want to screen share?
Yeah, well, I can give that a go.
Excellent.
Oh yeah, great.
Beautiful, perfect.
Okay. Well done. Well done.
Thanks. Well, I didn't want to. Now I'll just see if I can go to the next one. Next, great. Okay. Yeah. So hi. So my name's Jessica. So I just whipped this thing together, this slideshow yesterday. So apologies if it's a bit rough, but anyway, because I was excited to talk to anyone who came to this discussion because it's one of my big passions. So. And so, as I will explain, the concerns of in the Australian Unemployed Workers Union, as in you see the icon, the logo at the bottom there, and so our members were actually living in the Miners' Rest Caravan Park in Wonthaggi, which was where the poorest people basically and the most in housing crisis turned up, and the Salvos, for example, which are the only body that deals with homelessness, were able to sort of temporarily put people in there. So, and also it helped our meetings that at the time a councillor from the Bass Coast Shire was actually joining our meetings. So that's how we got involved with the housing crisis. So that's just some of the coverage we got in the local paper. So that's Jeff and me outside the Miners' Rest, as you can see. It was pretty run down. Of course, it was run down to start with, but it definitely provided a need. And our members that liked living there actually liked the community aspect of being near other families and households. So occasionally when we got hold of free food, we just sort of drop down there and we just say, oh, what a bit of food, and people would sort of come out of their caravans. So basically, it provided a need, and that really informs what Zoe is talking about the kind of things that we would like to see built, which would echo the community aspect, but not the rundown aspect of living in a potentially leaky caravan. So what the guy who ran the caravan park used to do was, if people were moving in together, which is the case of our friends, he gave them a pot of paint so they could make their caravan a bit nicer. So just sort of, little touches like that. So the Salvos were on the front foot, and they set up a group to organise the rehousing of the people at the caravan park. But unfortunately, not all were housed where they wanted to live, and they were given a number of offers. And we did come across people who hadn't really, they might have accommodation, but it wasn't really what they wanted. And again, that reflects the problems with just the fact that there aren't affordable possibilities in Bass Coast and neighbouring shires. So we decided to hold a public forum in Wonthaggi in February 2020. And as it says there, it was packed, which then had a bit of influence on possibly, that council looking into their policy. Who knows, really. That's a little bit of coverage of our forum. And there's Jeff who's on the local council. He was chairing it. And what we understood a lot from hearing from the people in Melbourne from Defend and Extend Public Housing was that there are differences between the different types of affordable housing, and that's what Zoe mentioned before. So then COVID hit last year, and so we were unable to sort of continue campaigning. We had a petition which had quite a few signatures asking the council to look into supporting crisis accommodation. So that all had to be put aside. And then, of course, the big announcement came, which Zoe referred to before, of the 25 million. So I saw this quote, which is sort of spoke to me anyway. Yeah, we've got a bit of that happening around our area, that's for sure, second homes, etc. Now, this is the interesting graphic that came through from Melbourne. So similar to what Zoe showed before, but we had quite a bit of debate in Housing Matters about the fact that we've got members in our group who are in public housing right now in Wonthaggi, and you'd have the same on Phillip Island. I'm not sure where you're based, Lisa, but it's the thing about public housing is it's actually mandated that it's 25% of your income, and it also is long term. It's for the term of your natural life, really. It's a permanent offer when you have that housing, and that takes a lot of the stress out of the situation. Community housing isn't necessarily 25%, that the percentage can go up. And then, of course, affordable, which can be run by housing organisations or private agents. So that can be as much as 80% of the market rate. So that this terminology we have to be quite aware of when we're talking about what we want. And what we've ended up deciding is we're not going to get tied into an argument about these definitions, but what we're saying is that the housing we want to see on Bass Coast should be using the same model as public housing, which is to be mandated to be 25% of your income, and also to be secure. What kind of housing? So I thought that people from outside Wonthaggi might like to see a few examples, and it might be interesting for Zoe as an architect to look at some of these examples. I just took these yesterday. So those are some little units in just only a few minutes from where I live in the central Wonthaggi. Nice thing about them is they've got their own little backyard at the back. They are only 1 bedroom, but as you can see, they are very accessible, and it'd be a walk to town for those people. Although I do know someone who lives in one of those places, and she was keen to get a lift, but if she was more mobile, she'd probably be walking. And these are the ones, the Murray Street public housing. We've got members who live there. So behind those, there's a whole other sort of a U shape of other public housing units, and again, completely accessible. If you are in a wheelchair, you'd be able to go right into that place and go right through into the back area, which is a courtyard sort of arrangement. The bad thing is that no solar. So our friend who lives in this public housing pays quite big gas bills, and of course we would like a campaign just to get a retrofit of solar on those, and because they're ideally situated in Wonthaggi. Now, this is another interesting community housing. So we don't know exactly what percentage of their income they're paying, but the nice thing about it is, as accessibility wise, there are still some ground level. I should be using my mouse here. I was using my hand, which is not much point. So you can see where my cursor is, that those flats are completely accessible, and then others are those are flats, so 2-story. And these ones on the left in the red car are actually single houses, but they've got 3 bedrooms. So yeah, an interesting mix. So Bass Coast, I'm going to go quickly through these stats because Zoe already did them, but the general trend is, of course, up in regards to the need for good, secure housing, and yeah, the older demographic as well. So slightly a few more women than men are actually in need, and that's why I think these single units that I showed the pictures of are quite important. Now, I've looked into the rent assistance situation a bit myself, because as it says here, around 3,000 households receiving it, which is 24% of the population. But I just yesterday looked at the real estate window, around $400 for to rent a house in Wonthaggi. Could be up to 3 bedrooms, and you only get this very small amount of money from you to help with your rent. So a lot of people who aren't renting don't realise how little the maximum rent assistance is. And then next one. So yeah, affordable housing. We do know that there are people camping in the bush around the place. I don't know where everyone else lives, but I don't know if that's happening on Phillip Island, but it's definitely happening around other parts of Bass Coast. And people, for whatever reason, have fallen through the cracks regarding the Salvo's emergency housing setup. And so they've decided to take matters to their own hands and camp. And in some cases, local landowners have actually been fine about that and have just left them to it because they realise it's an extreme situation. So some of the things we have outlined, this is part of our mission and for our group, Housing Matters. And so, of course, goes without saying, we want to see best practice in terms of sustainability and accessibility. Another important point is when the big bill does come to Wonthaggi, when the spades start going into the ground, we want to provide opportunities and training for local people, particularly young people with apprenticeships. We want the big housing big bill to be in central locations, as Zoe mentioned, because of course you can then have access to community facilities, doctors, etc. And then these last 2 points are from the definition of public housing in the earlier graphic, which is about security of tenure and also for the rent to be capped at a maximum of 25%. Now, a friend of mine is also in community housing in Infill, and he recently got a part-time job. Well, he found that his rent percentage went up because he had that little bit more income. It was only a part-time job, actually leafleting in letterboxes, but he felt very despondent because basically the percentage was set so high, too high, so he was regarded as having a better income, therefore he didn't really get any net gain out of getting this part-time job. So that's why the percentage is quite important. So I suppose our group is fairly unique. We've got public tenants, we've got architects, we've got people who just passionately believe that this is the right thing to do. And so we've reached out to we've decided to basically follow that successful public meeting and have another one. And I'll see if I can find the graphic. And anyway, basically the public meeting's coming up very quickly. It's on the 4th of December. And Zoe was going to see if she can whack that up to remind people. But
having a look right now.
Yeah, but basically from our own sort of experience as community members, we've decided that to get people together and to have a community input into what the big build is going to result in is very crucial. And a few other little notes I made that Wonthaggi is actually quite unique because it has a lot of Crown land, which is actually controlled by the Victorian government. So it means that if Homes Victoria, which is what it's called now, it used to be called the Department of Housing, if they came into Wonthaggi, they'd find ample public land around, but it's whether it's available, whether it's accessible to the sort of services. But we're actually quite optimistic that we could give a list of places right now to the state government of where housing could be built in Wonthaggi. But of course, we're not just talking about Wonthaggi. So I don't know if people on Phillip Island or people in TRPI have ideas about that as well. That's something we probably need to look at.
What's interesting, and I guess a slight segue, and forgive me, I have a screaming child in the background, but I guess in my previous or ongoing but not so major role as an architect, looking at how social and affordable housing integrates with community, I know the current thinking is that it should be just part of the housing that's available. It should not be segregated. So I think that to me is quite a big point, that you shouldn't necessarily know if your neighbour is, low income or struggling. It should just be part of the makeup of our housing structure and the way that we live in communities.
They have a new terminology now, which is infill housing. So what they're talking about is building public housing on blocks that are vacant, so that there's not a say a little housing development. But as you could see in those slides, there's actually a bias at the moment against little developments like that one I showed before, which has the range of sizes of flats. But the people I know who live in that one really like it. There is a little bit of community. Like there's actually 2 households where they've got together and they sort of have a relationship, but they're not living together. So I'm totally for little developments like that, not huge like you see in London, but you don't have to be just in a single house, although I've been to some of those single houses in Wonthaggi too.
So hopefully everyone can see, I did find it finally, Jessica. Hopefully everyone can see this. So it is the 1 to 3 p.m, Saturday the 4th of December at the Baptist Church in Wonthaggi. So it's a public meeting. So I think that's a really good one to get a lot of input, I guess, and just for people to understand the need and then the need to respond as well.
And what we're hoping also to do is have their leaflets for people who want to be involved with. They might have secure housing themselves, but they want to be involved with the process of lobbying so that we get the best possible outcome. And so we're going to make sure that we do that as well. I had an interesting talk to the Salvos yesterday, and they are going to provide us with a lot of backup. Hopefully someone from Salvos will speak as well at the meeting. But I suppose looking ahead, we want to see this happening, and we want probably some community some partnerships happening with some of these community organizations that can manage the housing, and we want we want to get some action, and we've got people who are in, for example, the seed bank, who are involved with our group, who are really keen to sort of help with plantings if a small housing development started, and all that increases people's connection.
Certainly does. It's so valuable, and we all need to keep spreading the awareness all the time. We never know what tomorrow brings for all of us. We all need to work together. Exactly.
I doubt there'd be anyone who hasn't had a scary moment in life that could have defined them one way or the other. So I know I've had a few. And yep, still here just, but I guess let's open it up now. We've got roughly about 10 minutes left in our allocated time slot. Does anyone have any thoughts or comments or questions or anecdotes related to any of this information? Or yeah, I know.
We live in Silver Leaves. We've got a lovely little tiny 2-bedroom beach house where we live, and we've been down here for 4 years permanently. And prior to that, I was helping out at the Salvos in St Kilda in the kitchen. And I suppose when I saw this advertised today, I went, awesome. I really want to find out more about what's happening locally, because this is our community. So it's really good to get some data and some figures, because when you go looking for it, unless you know where to look, you never find it.
I was just going to say on that point, I kept finding all these screenshots I'd done beforehand of stats and data. So I'll just quickly share this as well, just because this was, and I found this on the website, Bass Coast Shire website, when I was writing an article actually for a local paper. And it does have a lot of sections that you can click on. I don't know if you can see this well enough or not. Let me zoom in a little.
It's pretty easy to see, yeah.
But it does actually give a lot of these prices. So this is obviously median rental for December 20. So we know from personal experience there's been a lot of change in the last year as well. Lone person households, and it's quite interesting, like housing stress. So there's some really good data, but again, you're exactly right, Christine. It's about knowing where to find it and what's happening locally.
Also, if we're talking about Phillip Island, the community centre, Pical, they have a very active food parcel handout, and also food comes in from the community garden. So they're really in touch with the situation in on the island. You're not, Silver Leaves is San Remo, isn't it?
No, it's near Cows on the other side of the golf course.
Oh, okay, I get it. Yeah, sorry. So Greg Thompson from Pical is going to be speaking at the public meeting as well. So he'll be able to. He's quite passionate about. He's noticed, for example, that there are a lot of people coming down to Phillip Island because they think they might be able to get a place to stay in a caravan park off season, and so of course those people are going to be under severe housing stress. And anyway, he's going to be there, and he'll be able to give us a bit of a picture as well as of the kind of pressures that people are living in.
He's been doing a great job in the last 3 years, I think, since he's been in the job. He's been great. Yes, people do a wonderful job with all of their different programs. Zoe, do you know on Phillip Island, is there much land that the council, not council, it would be state government? Sorry, Jessica, did you say it was
it's state government land that it's called Crown land. Often it's parks, which is great, but that's what the state government should in theory have access to.
Yeah, and I think, Christine, in response to your question, I don't know the specifics on Phillip Island. I'll have to find out, because that's a really good question. But I know council
there's a lot of public land available on Phillip Island, and I just think I wanted to add in those stats of pre-COVID as well. So you've got people suffering job losses, and with the way the market is at the moment, people are being priced out as well, especially Phillip Island, Kilcunda, San Remo. I'm not sure, Jessica, if it's the same at Wonthaggi, but rents are skyrocketing here on Phillip Island.
And the other thing is that, as I was saying to Zoe before we started, someone might be living in Wonthaggi and actually have a job opportunity on the island because of tourism and Christmas coming up, but they can't get there because of the public transport. So the thing about having affordable housing with access to jobs, another big thing. Another interesting thing that Greg Thompson from Pickle said is that Colac Otway Shire have brought in a system where they actually were involved with building affordable housing, but they also set up public transport so that it wasn't actually on the, in the areas like Lawn, which of course would be high cost, but it was in a cheaper area to build it, but they provided good public transport. So they were thinking ahead about employment opportunities.
Those linkages are so important.
Yeah, a lot of that sort of stuff does get missed in those contexts as not being, it's a livability factor that isn't considered.
Yeah.
Well, I even listened to a great session yesterday as part of the festival that I think Michael arranged, who's on the call here. But even just the notion of instead of, quarter acre blocks, designing sort of little hubs of community that have access to land and sit within sort of a broader farmland, but that are based on like a 10-kilometre range cycling track between hubs. That sort of notion that you actually don't base your townships on cars and rectangular blocks, which with an old surveyor thing when Australia was colonised and has no relationship to land, So there's just so many hangovers in the way we do things that unless, I guess, you rethink them from first principles, we just keep recreating. And I think they don't necessarily serve us so well in a sort of community and housing context, as well as obviously social connection as well. So very complex topics, and they're all interwoven as well.
The other thing is that the Bass Coast Shire Council is looking at it's reviewing its planning scheme at the moment, and that's a big interest of our group, is the fact that it could be possible to broaden out some of these definitions of what is housing, what is farming. Well, incidentally, someone says they're bringing an example of a towable tiny home to the public meeting. So I said, bring it along.
Fantastic.
Love that.
Yeah.
Yep.
Bringing what along, Jessica?
A tiny home.
Very exciting. Oh, that sounds great. So I'm just thinking, let me see if I've still got that. No, I've closed it. I was going to bring up the poster again, but I've shut it. But look, I think we are right on time. And I think it's been a really interesting discussion, and obviously just the tip of the iceberg in terms of getting things happening and getting involved and, shaping the future. So thank you, everyone, for coming today. And thanks, Jessica, in particular, for you've sort of inspired me into this dialogue as well over the last few months. So it's great to be here, and I think there's a lot we can do by all working together and coming together to look after each other. So thank you.
Thanks, Zoe. Thanks, Jessica.
Okay.
Thank you. Cheerio.
Good to see you too, Christine.
Yeah.